Hi, friends. Welcome to Lawyer Up. I'm your host, John Ting. If you haven't done so already, please hit subscribe below, smash the like button. Please leave a comment below. We'd love to hear if you've enjoyed our interviews or even if you have a interest in a different topic so we can invite someone to speak on that. We have a guest today who has significant pro bono experience giving back to the community. He's currently serving on several boards. He's currently serving as chair of several committees. Most recently, he was appointed to be on the board of the Legal Aid of Northwest Texas. It's in downtown Dallas, which actually provides aid to about 114 counties in Texas. If you know Texas and how many counties it has, I think it's about 256. So that's a significant amount of coverage. The State Bar of Texas has actually recognized his work and appointed him to the Standing Committee on the Legal Services of the Poor. He also sits on the board of the Property Standards Committee for the City of Carrollton. He also sits on the board of the World Affairs Council of DFW and the Sunray Education Foundation. He graduated from American University School of Law in DC and actually licensed to practice law in Texas and New York. So about his day job, he practices estate planning, which he prefers to call succession planning, probate, marital property agreements, corporate formations, and business transactions. He also serves as a board member of the probate section of the Collin County Bar Association and also serves as the chair of the Connection Committee for the Dallas Asian American Bar Association. Now, without further ado, let's meet Jack Fan. Hey, Jack Fan, welcome to Lawyer Up.
Hey.
What's going on? So we knew each other from Dallas, from the Dallas Asian American Bar Association. I know you've stepped up through that time and even more now that I'm in Houston. Can you tell us about your leadership position?
Well, I think there's a lot has changed since you moved down to Houston. I wouldn't say much that there's been any new leadership positions. I think I just became a little bit more active within our local bar associations. Had a little bit more time.
Maybe it's because I'm thinking about your recently awarded pro bono award with the APIS, Asian Pacific Intersection with Texas.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah. I guess I was nominated and I got an award.
You're so modest. Well, I know through learning what you've been doing recently, some pro bono cases yourself, you had a landlord tenant type of case. Of course, without divulging anything confidential, can you share a little bit about your experience helping this client?
Of course. So once COVID-19 hit, we knew within the local community that evictions were going to become a big problem because once layoffs started to happen, businesses started to close. At some point in time, people were going to have a hard time choosing between paying rent or putting food on the table. And so Mark Melton, who was a partner at Holland and Knight, had helped organize a number of pro bono attorneys to help answer questions from tenants as well as landlords to kind of put them more at ease as to what was going on with regards to their housing situation. And so for the longest of time, we've had a moratorium within the state of Texas, as well as some covered property through the CARES Act that prevented landlords from evicting tenants. But now we're coming to the point where evictions could happen at any time.
So that's great work. And I remember you briefly mentioned that it should have been maybe a 15-minute hearing, but it took much longer. What kind of happened with that, procedurally, I suppose?
So one of the things that I found by doing more of the eviction defense on the tenant side, because I typically represent landlords, is that tenants, both sides, if you're a pro se litigant, you tend not to know how to frame an argument that the judge is willing to hear. More often than not, the judge basically says, that's not important to me. I don't care about that. And they're not very kind to people who are kind of talking over them. So when I said that what should have been a 10-minute hearing, it was the fact that this case should have been dismissed long ago. But because the tenant was trying to represent themselves, they ended up trying to bring in a lot of facts, a lot of backstory, a lot of history, and the judges really didn't care about that. Because when we deal with evictions, there's really often two questions that are really important. One, did you pay rent? And then two, did the landlord comply with the statutory requirements for notice? And if the landlord didn't do one of them, basically he failed to provide notice correctly, then they can't evict you.
Well, I'm glad. Thanks for sharing that because, most people, pro se litigants, think that it's important to share everything, which it depends on the context and the type of case for sure. So I'm glad to hear you're able to help that client out for sure. At least to buy them some more time, right? It's not the
Exactly.
permanent
All
solution.
I was able to do was buy them more time. And you go back and you're right, because a lot of people want to talk about the backstory. They want to talk about how the landlord didn't fix this thing, how the house is under disrepair, how it's a terrible place to be living in. And the reality is, for a tenant, you really have two choices in terms of remedy. One, allow the landlord allows you to terminate your lease and then you move out, or you stay and you keep paying rent. And that's really the only two choices that you have.
Right. And so now I know landlord tenant is not your everyday type of case. You're helping out in this case. And so you mentioned Mark Melton earlier. We plan to invite him too because I know he's, like you said, organized a lot of attorneys like yourself to help out. Um, but what intrigued you to help persons like your past pro bono client?
Oftentimes I think it's the person who's leading the effort. So Mark Melton was a facilitator of mine when I was a part of the Dallas Association of Young Lawyers Leadership Academy. So Mark and I have known each other through the leadership program that he's been helping facilitate. And so when Mark had sent out a message saying, "Hey, I'm looking for lawyers to help," I jumped at the opportunity to help him.
That's great. So it's definitely clear that helpful to have certain mentors that you've known in the past. But I know you have a good heart anyway. But so that combination definitely helped in this situation. Uh, Now let's talk a little bit about what you do every day. I know you practice estate planning and also probate, I believe, right?
Correct. And you're right. Eviction defense is not my primary form of practice. In fact, eviction defense would be a terrible way to develop a practice as a whole, because oftentimes unfortunately, if you can't pay rent, you probably really couldn't pay an attorney. And as I've been finding out, judges aren't awarding attorneys fees to lawyers in this field either. And I had asked someone about that, and they basically said, "Well, Jack, it's because they're going to see you again in about 30 days. So there's really no point in awarding attorney's fees to a tenant if the only reason that you won is defective notice." But my primary practice is in the estate and trust work. So I do help families with preparing wills and estate plans and living documents to really think of it as a succession plan.
That's great. Especially that's a necessary type of work that you're doing, especially during the coronavirus period. It is especially a prime example of you just never know when someone could pass, and no one wants to talk about it, right? But you have to be prepared. Can you share some challenges during this time of helping a client especially when you're not, you're trying to wear PPE and all that?
Well, so I think our industry has now changed a lot in terms of adapting to the COVID-19 environment. Uh, Early on in the days, and we're talking back in April, which feels like ages ago at this point, we were talking about having drive-up will ceremonies. And so where could I begin? Well, let's talk about the challenges in doing an estate plan in our COVID-19 social distancing era. So the very first thing actually ends up being just the signing ceremony. When you're signing a will, and oftentimes an estate planning package, which includes a lot of your important documents, this is your power of attorney, this is your medical power of attorney, this is your HIPAA authorization, this is your designation of a guardianship in case of later incapacity, this is a designation of a guardian for minor children, this is the authorization for a burial agent for disposition of control of remains. Well, it's a mouthful, but ultimately speaking, you have to be in person, you have to sign it, and you often have to have witnesses and notaries. So again, imagine 4 or 5 people having to gather around just so that you can sign documents. We were not really allowed to do things remotely. So for a period of time, you couldn't just look at a computer screen, sign a piece of paper in front of a public notary, and then have them stamp it, say, okay, that's a notary. And even today, that's really still a very bad idea. So the physical logistics of how do you get people together to actually sign everything in each other's presence and notarized is a whole separate question. But if you take a step back, of course, about the overall practice of estate planning in the context of our COVID-19 situation, I think it's a little bit scary because at any time, if you did become infected and you had to go to a hospital, who takes care of your family? Who takes care of your finances? And if you didn't have the proper documentations to authorize another family member to take care of you, then you may be up a creek effectively because no one's able to take care of you while you're under quarantine. And to a certain extent, yes, we live in a much more modern society where we have online banking, where we can pay bills online, but not everything can always be done online. For instance, signing a will.
Right. Well, even before you can access online, you need to have authorization, which those are the type of documents you can help guide a client through. So it's definitely important.
Correct.
Um,
And the one story I love to tell people so that they are aware of is that, again, if you're a young family, if you're a young parent and you're trying to take care of your kids, your parents, the children's grandparents, they can't just walk into the hospital and say, hey, my grandkids are here, tell me what's going on. And even then, as an adult, and this is one of the things, again, I love talking to people about, is when I was in my mid-20s and I had some blood tests done, my mom calls up the doctor's office and asks the nurse, hey, my son's blood test came in, could you tell us what happened? And her answer was, no, he's over 18, we can't talk to you. And so having that realization that, again, if you got COVID-19 or you were sick, you were sent to the hospital, who can take care of you? Who can talk to the hospital? And more importantly, who can talk to your insurance company? And if you don't have the proper authorizations to allow your family members, and again, usually husband and wife, no problem, but your next immediate family members, your parent.
let me take a step back. People, you and I know that people in general are hesitant to even talk about it. Is there a way you can debunk some of those myths about these documents?
I'm not really sure what myths we would be debunking.
Well, maybe not myth, but maybe misconception, or is it like just our American culture why we don't want to even sign these type of documents or even discuss death, even though TV and news is all about death?
Well, I think TV is all about death, but they don't actually talk about what happens after death.
Right.
I think the challenging part is that death, of course, is a very hard subject for us to really think about because we don't really want to think about our own mortality. And what we try to do as estate planning attorneys is to help think beyond about taking care of your family. Because again, if you purchase insurance on your car because the car might be, in an accident, and you may have insurance that covers personal injury or even the damage to the car, then the next question is, okay, well, why don't you do that for your family in case something really does happen to you and you're not there anymore? And so death is so remote for a lot of us that we don't really think about it that way. Oftentimes, the only time that people actually come to my office and say, hey, Jack, I need to get a will, it's often because somebody in their immediate family died and they understand what it's like to actually have to deal with death and go to trying to get that property transferred from one family member to another. It's talking to the insurance company. It's trying to sell a house and suddenly realize that I can't sell the house because the title is still in my father's name. And so oftentimes that headache, when you experience that headache because of the death of a family member, that's when you realize the importance of having a proper plan. And this is also why I really like to use the word succession planning as opposed to estate planning. A lot of people do think of estate planning and think, oh, I don't have an estate, I'm not that rich. Well, estate planning doesn't mean that you're living on a 20-acre house with a mansion on top of it. An estate is basically anything that is still in part of your name. So whether it's a car, whether it's a bank account, whether it's your retirement policy, all of this is still part of your quote unquote estate. And therefore you have to have a strategy in place that allows that property to transfer from you to another person.
No,
And let's
that's a
forget about
great
even
phrase
dying.
you've come up with, Jack.
Well,
Succession.
thanks. And so again, forget even dying. Our biggest concern nowadays is about living longer, because again, as we continue to age, we see a lot more issues dealing with Alzheimer's, dementia, and so forget about dying. You die once, but if
Right.
you have Alzheimer or dementia, or you're disabled, you'll live like that for years on end, and you
Right.
need someone else to be able to prepare your housing arrangements for you. And so that's actually more important than dying, I would say.
No, you're right. Yeah, because that could last, years, where you need a representative on your behalf. That's for sure. That's for sure. Um, are there any other misconceptions that the public could have about, let's say about probate actually through that process post passing? Because you did mention about, if example, like about transferring title to a house. Because I think most people think that, to take it a little deeper here, that, it's my spouse that died, so it should transfer automatically. I feel like I've heard that before, um, but I'm sure there's more to it, right?
That's a really good point. And because we live in Texas, we're community property state. And so everyone thinks that, well, because it's community property, then obviously my spouse gets everything that I own. And that's not necessarily true, because we have a very complicated formula based off of whether or not the property is technically separate property or community property, real property, or personal property. So there's actually kind of a grid that we look at that's actually, 4 different boxes. And there's a different formula for every single category of assets. And so you're right. I hear a lot of times where we're like, well, why didn't your dad ever probate your mother's estate? It's like, well, they were married for so long that the house is under their names. We just naturally assume the title to the house went to to the surviving parent. And again, that's not the case. Legally speaking, under community property, it does. But practically speaking, the title companies don't recognize that. They need certain documents to be able to verify that this is now who the owner of the house is.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, because it's not. I'm sure you got some kind of guide for your own clients what to do after post death, but most people don't know the scenarios. I, my I'm sure
It's
my
really
mom did
tragic.
after my dad passed, so had to
Exactly.
sort that out.
When your family member passes away, I'm so sorry, John.
No, you
It's
go
just that
ahead. Go
when a
ahead.
family member passes away, you're oftentimes in grief. The last thing you want to deal with is, oh, I've got to go to a bank. I need to fill out a W8BIEN form again now.
Mhm.
So that's the last thing you want to be worried about.
Absolutely, that's for sure. Well, take a step back and going back about your pro bono experience. Can you share why it's important for other attorneys to give back in that way, even regardless of what type of case it is?
You know, I don't really see pro bono as giving back to the community. And it's a minority opinion in many regards. And here's why. I see pro bono as an opportunity to build your practice. I use pro bono as a way to really learn different areas of law or get more experience that I normally wouldn't. And so in all of my years of doing pro bono work, I've actually seen my wheelhouse continue to grow, because the more that you actually see these problems, the more that you deal with problems, the more that you're able to deal with them when you actually have a paying client that wants you to fix it. So again, the reason I got into eviction defense work in some ways because our investors. And so everything that's on the other side of the aisle as a tenant is things I'm learning how to deal with when my clients come in and say, hey, I actually need to evict my own tenant. What do I need to do? And at that point, I know how to do it properly because I've been on the defense side. And
Yeah,
so in every area of law that I've been interested in doing, I find that pro bono is a really good way to understand and see all the different questions. I like to sometimes go back to Groundhog's Day, the movie, where Bill Murray, when they look at Bill Murray, he knows everything. The reason why he knows everything is because he's seen everything. And that's how I feel about pro bono. It gives me an opportunity to absorb every single case pattern, every single facts that could be out there, every problem. And when the time comes, I've seen it before.
That's a great different frame of mind because, you can always absolutely learn something from your pro bono experience. That's for sure. I've helped out on. I remember when I was in Dallas, I helped on a probate, divorce. They're all unique experiences because, like you said, much different fact patterns that we have to help with. hmm Now, let's see. So, can you explain? I know there's just like the different fact patterns. They're not a typical straightforward case. Let's say for probate, right? But what what are some type of scenarios, just one or two, I suppose, that you can share on why it's important to have a will because you would still need to do the probate process. And
I
let's
think it
say
all
for
comes,
depending what type of asset they hold.
yeah. I think your real key is when you look at probate situations, it's how long it takes to sometimes transfer property. And so I've always told people that everyone has a will, but the will may not be what you intended to happen, because under the Texas Estates Code, we do have a succession plan for properties for estates without a will. That's what we call intestate.
Mhm.
So that's number one. There's already a formula designed in mind, but again, it may not be what you intended. So maybe I'll talk about that in 1 second. But the other thing is just practically speaking. If you don't have a will, you've got to go through a much longer process known as a determination of heirship and request for either an independent administration or a dependent administration. And what do all these words effectively mean? Basically, there's the possibility that if you don't have a will and everyone cannot agree as to who should serve as the fiduciary or the personal representative of the estate, the court may have to appoint one person to play a game of mother may I. And so right now I've been involved in a years-long administration of an estate because of the fact that there is so much property out there that, again, we've got to go notify every single family member. Okay, now I've notified you. We're planning to sell the house. Okay, now to sell the house, I've got to go back to court, get a court order allowing me to sell the house. Okay, done. Next, I've now found a buyer. Got to go back to court. I have to request the court's permission to sell the house. Oh, by the way, I've got to notify everyone that I'm now ready to sell the house. Great. Now we're ready to close. We're now 6-7 months in. That's assuming we found a buyer on day one.
Right.
So the family member may have died, let's say in August of 2019, but we're not able to sell the house until September of 2020, maybe. That's assuming we can get all the notices and the hearing set. And so imagine if you're in a family situation is where you rely on the sale of the house to be able to pay for rent or to pay for schooling or any number of things. That is a terrible situation to put your family in. And that's something that can happen without a will.
Thanks for that context. That Ryan, I believe you also maybe have to have like another attorney involved, right? If you don't have a will.
Right. You remember it because you remember the attorney ad litem. So you're right. So
Right.
For instance, I'm now representing an estate where husband passed away and there is no will. Luckily, we're in Collin County. But that being said, all it means is that things move a little bit faster in Collin County than it does in Dallas County. But we do have to appoint a second attorney. So yes, you may not want to hire an attorney to write your will while you're alive. Well, guess what? Your family will have to hire that attorney to do almost the same thing, which is to say to verify who the family members are.
Right. So just additional burden, stress on the heirs.
That's right. And luckily for a lot of the clients that I represent, it's a really simple family. We're talking one, maybe two marriages at best. All the children are either with the same nuclear family, maybe with one or two other people at best. In very rare instances, but it does happen, we may be doing a very complicated family tree. So I always love joking about the one case where we're talking about 34 different heirs at law that are potential, 3 of them who live overseas. And it's because there are 14 aunts and uncles that we could be looking at, 13 of them who have passed away. One of them is surviving at the time of the application, but that means we have to find every single cousin that exists.
I wish you the best on that family tree diagram.
We kind of, yeah, we kind of
Right.
stopped at some point.
It could probably go quite a while, pretty deep,
It could.
different levels.
It could.
Well, speaking about, family, and I'm thinking about your roots. I read that you went to American University in DC, right? For your JD. Can you explain what made you want to be a lawyer in the first place? If you don't mind sharing that.
That's it's a funny question because it's not a question I think about a lot at this point. Going to law school was over 10 years ago for me. And so
Right,
it's like,
Jack, I
what
like
was
to
I
have
doing in
my
my
guests think a little
mid-20s?
Reflect back.
I think that it's a large part it's because of the family. I've been very fortunate that my parents really wanted me to become a professional. So they really encouraged me to continue with law school. And I think my early days as an attorney were finishing law school. It's because law school teaches you how to think about everything differently. And so it really helped out with the family business. It really helped out as an entrepreneur. And at some point in time, I decided to sell my company and then actually start a law practice instead. But ultimately, the question is, why did I go into law school? My parents told me to go. And I said, okay, I'll go to law school.
Well, sounds like it worked out for you.
I'll tell that to my parents.
It's come full, complete circle now for you and your family. So that's good. Yeah. Now, but what also in terms of DC, did your family grow up there, or how did you make the transfer to Texas?
Well, our family's always been in Texas. I grew up more or less around Carrollton and Plano area, but I've always wanted to leave Texas. So my first stop was in Indiana. I think that's not one of the degrees I have here. That's a state bar, and then that's American University.
Oh,
but
right.
But I really liked. Sorry. Long story shorter, is that I had an opportunity to intern in Prague, and I really liked the European city feel. And I knew that New York was too big, too expensive, but DC was kind of in the middle ground. That it had a very tight-knit feel. I could bike to the office and feel like I was in a metropolis. So that's why I would gravitate towards DC.
Well, glad you're back. I also want to get out of Texas myself, so I went to CUNY, City University of New York, and yeah, it was like the room was half the size of my bedroom was half the size of this office at the house.
We have a very clean office. I was pointing out to some of my colleagues that there was an article of how Bermuda was allowing year-long visas. If you wanted to live and work from home, you could keep your job here in the States, but
Right.
live in Bermuda, assuming it wasn't hurricane season, I suppose. And it was really cheap, apparently.
Huh. Well, we have a couple months in the hurricane season to research that and consider it, right?
Definitely. I've been thinking about just going on the road and just working on the road as well.
Right. Well, hopefully, actually, you mentioned about in-person signing ceremonies, right? A will signing. Is Texas allowing any opportunity to do it like remote or online?
Not quite. There's been some talks within the state leadership to propose legislation that allows for electronic wills. I do know that the Uniform Commercial Code has this contemplated, and other states have adopted legislation to allow electronic or digital versions of wills and digital versions to be signed. But as of right now, Texas still requires what we call wet ink signatures for your will.
Okay. Well, hopefully they get that short up so then you can, work remotely somewhere else.
If it does, I will not be in Dallas.
Right. Well, you grew up in the area for like myself too. So yeah, I just got to get out sometimes. Well, let's
Looking
see
forward to
here.
it. Looking forward to it. There are certain things. So one of the main problems that we have in Texas is what's referred to as airship properties. And again, for a lot of family members, especially family members who live in South Dallas, and let's be more blunt, a lot of families, who African American families, they've been living in the same house for generations, but they've never actually transferred title from one generation to the next. So we've seen cases before where a family member purchased a house back in the 1940s, 1950s. Generations have gone by. Family members have moved in, family members have moved out. But now, no one knows who owns the property. And so it requires a considerable amount of effort to be able to help clear title so that someone can take ownership of the property and then either start paying taxes on it, or we'll take, home ownership in the sense that I'm going to take care of this house. I'm going to mow the lawn. I'm going to make repairs. And so one of the big efforts that I've had with an organization that's called Advocates for Community Transformation is to address this problem where, again, you may have this house passing through generations without anyone ever truly owning title to the house. But at some point in time, maybe the property was vacated and abandoned, or now someone's ready to sell the house, but we need to clear title and to deal with this airship property. And so I think as an estate planning attorney, or even any attorneys in general, to be able to be aware of how do you help family members transfer title, because sometimes these houses aren't that expensive. We're talking about a property value of maybe $30,000 to $40,000 sometimes still, and that's really shocking coming from the north side of town, where houses are in $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 at least. But there's a number of property down on the south side where, again, no more than $30,000, $40,000 in terms of the market value. And so it's really hard for these families to either hire an attorney or to deal with it with their title company. And so I would say, in terms of social justice, this is one of the things that we're looking at as a way to help economic mobility for more people.
That's a great point. I remember that, similar house value for a client, a pro bono client, helped with the legal aid of Northwest Texas. And so I remember making a house visit, and that I didn't realize that generations could pass, live in that house, and no one explains, right, the need to transfer title. So I can see how that could happen for sure. Okay. Well, I guess I know that the Dallas bar has legal volunteer clinics, I guess you would
We
call
do.
it.
We
And
do.
so I'm not sure if one of those covers estate planning. I know there's like a veterans clinic and I think one for probate possibly. But part of it is education, right? So at some point, just trying to find the right platform or medium to share that information.
Well, luckily, John, I think you're thinking about exactly the same organization. All the clinics you're talking about, they're all under the umbrella of the Dallas Volunteer Attorney Program. And so Dallas Volunteer Attorney Program is a partnership between the Legal Aid of Northwest Texas as well as the Dallas Bar Association, in which private attorneys will be referred pro bono cases to deal with a wide variety of matters. This includes family law. This includes consumer issues such as contract disputes, title disputes over usually cars. We also deal with estate planning and probate matters as well. On occasion, and this actually ends up going to the legal aid side, meaning Legal Aid of Northwest Texas. Housing issues would go there. So we do have a variety of cases that attorneys do handle. We also handle with veteran affairs, and also sometimes with Social Security and disability issues as well.
Oh yeah, that is a wide variety that DVAP, Dallas Volunteer Attorney Program, does help with. Well, glad to hear that they do have
Houston has a really great program too. I think it's the Houston Volunteer I think it's the Houston Volunteer Lawyers Association.
Yes, that's right. And then the legal aid here is called Lone Star Legal Aid, I believe. Yeah, they seem to have a lot of programs going on as well. So that's good to hear. Yeah, so it's good to know there's clinics available, but if there's a way we can push some of that awareness out there, some pointers before the legal problem exists, right?
Absolutely. Although I would say one of the scary things, and it hasn't really been addressed by a lot of the legal aid organizations necessarily, is pre-COVID, we did clinics in person. But a lot of the clinics, whether it's hosted by one of the legal aid providers, we're talking about Lone Star, Rio Grande Legal Aid, Legal Services Corporation, or even North Texas Legal Aid, Legal Aid of Northwest Texas. Most of these organizations have now moved their clinic. So imagine the prospective client who is low income that does not have access to the internet. There may be a problem at that point in terms of accessing one of our legal aid organizations because they don't have internet access. Or even worse, everyone's relying on their cell phones nowadays for internet access, and you just can't fill out a form on a small
Right.
tablet.
I mean, I know for our office, it's sometimes difficult to explain how to use Dropbox, for example, or some kind of video conference app. So yeah, good point, because I have received the email about the remote or video conferencing for the clinics, but yeah, that's and I, of course, heard of parents having difficult issues trying to get their kids staying online, right, for school. So that is definitely a problem. You know, hopefully,
And I think, again, imagine for a lot of these families, they have one phone or let's say one computer, but you have multiple children, you have multiple family members who need to share not just the internet bandwidth, but just the actual physical computer itself. How difficult it must be for them to be able to submit the proper documents or to be actually involved with their process. I've been involved with, again, for CPS mediations before, where it's a full day mediation. Well, if you have only one telephone and you're well, I know that if you're involved in CPS, your child may not be with you, but you have other family members who maybe you're relying on their phone, or you're borrowing someone else's phone and they need the phone as well. Does that mean that you can't participate in your hearing or your mediation, and someone else needs to use that for their own work or school?
Yeah, definitely. That'd be interesting what the court system does about a situation like mediation, because everyone assumes that everyone has a phone or access to technology, right? So we'll see how that goes. Well, Jack, it's I know we're cutting. I appreciate your time because we're cutting close to you. I think having to go to Denton. So
I just gotta make a couple of trips to the records office.
Sure. Well, I know it's a Friday afternoon, so I really appreciate your time, sir, and I know you're going to be doing a lot of great work in Dallas, in the area, and we're going to drop a link of your website, your contact information, your office contact information in the description box below, so people know how to reach you.
Well, thank you, John. It's been a pleasure speaking with you, and it's always great to catch up.
Thanks, Jack. Talk to you soon.
Absolutely.